There was a radioactivity disaster that went undetected for months. Contaminated metal was turned into construction supplies and shipped across countries. Almost 20,000 houses were built. How did this happen? This is the story of the Juarez Cobalt 60 incident. In 1977, a hospital in the city of Ciudad, Juarez, Mexico, acquired a radiation machine. Anyone buying a machine like this needed to report it to the Mexican government, as these machines contained dangerous radioactive materials. But just for context, what is radiation? Radiation is essentially energy on the move. Everything around us is made out of atoms, and most of them are stable and they don't ever change their conformation. But some elements have atoms that have a lot of energy. If the energy is high enough, it may burst through your skin, your tissues, your bones, and cause some serious damage. Radiotherapy machines contain elements that can really do harm for your body if the exposure is long or uncontrolled. Now, let's go back to the video. For reasons that are unknown, the hospital did not report the purchase of this machine. This meant that they did not get the trained staff to install it, maintain it, and operate it. For that reason, they put it in storage. No lock, no warning signs, nothing. Enter the main subject in our story, Vicente Sotelo Alardin. He used to be a worker at the hospital, and it's been 6 years since the machine has been put in storage. So there are two main possibilities. The first, that the hospital required Vicente to dismantle the machine to get rid of it. And the second, that Vicente chose to dismantle it himself to sell the scrap metal. At this point, you probably see where this is going. Anyway, Vicente goes into this dark room and starts dismantling the machine. Inadvertently, he left the best for last. He reaches a capsule that is very heavy, and unbeknownst to him, it holds the source, the radioactive material. The capsule weighs approximately 100 kilograms, so he calls a friend for help. That is, of course, before drilling several holes in an attempt to break it open. Anyway, Vicente and his friend managed to pick up all the pieces and take them to Vicente's pickup truck. Through the holes that Vicente had drilled on the source, tiny 1 by 1 millimeter pellets of cobalt 60 start sprinkling all over his van and all over the street. At the yard, the cranes start sprinkling this cobalt 60 pellets from one pile to another, not only between the scrap metal, but also between the vehicles that were there to deliver more metal. But wait, there's more. After dropping off the metal at the scrap yard, Vicente's truck, the one carrying thousands of cobalt 60 pellets, breaks down on the street where he had to park it for 40 days. Until he was able to get it fixed. Then he parked it on the street outside his house for another 10 days. It has been almost 2 weeks since Vicente sold the contaminated metal, which at this point has been turned into construction rebar and metal table bases. These were sold across 17 states in Mexico, but also these were exported to the US abroad. And the worst part is, at this point, nobody knows anything. The only reason anybody found out about this incident was, and get this, because a truck transporting contaminated rebar in New Mexico took a wrong turn and ended up at the gate of Los Alamos National Laboratory. What happens at Los Alamos, you may be asking? Well, that's where Oppenheimer's first creation was ever developed. There were radiation detectors all over the perimeter of the laboratory, so when the truck got near enough, one of the cameras got activated and captured the license plate. And this is when people started to realize that they screwed up. The Mexican government ordered the location and disposal of all the contaminated metal. The US supported this by flying helicopters with equipment capable of locating the cobalt 60 pellets that at this point were spread all across Juarez. This is also where all the finger pointing started. The hospital declared that Vicente had disassembled the machine without permission, but Vicente said that he was ordered to do so. Out of the 6,600 tons of contaminated rebar, they recovered about a third of it. The rest was potentially present in approximately 17,600 buildings, out of which 814 were demolished. The rest still stand to date. So they recovered those materials, but what happened to Vicente's truck? About 2 months after the incident, they found it. It was still parked outside his house. And because it was used to transport the contaminated metal, they brought detectors to measure how bad the damage was. When they took readings out of the back of the truck, where the source was located. The meters read approximately 1,000 Roentgens per hour. To put this into context, some sections of the Chernobyl roof had levels between 8 and 12,000 Roentgens per hour. So what was present in Vicente's truck was bad. Very, very bad. They dug a big hole where they poured a lot of concrete and deposited all these items that were contaminated with radiation, including Vicente's infamous truck. And by the way, this happened very close to one of Juarez's prisons. All right, and here I have the official numbers on how many people were affected according to the government. First, people from the junkyard. They developed discoloration spots on their feet. They had general digestive distress, general headaches, and 4 workers, a worker's child, and a client had low levels of white blood cells. Then there were the neighbors of the zone where the truck was found. 3 of them had symptoms of high radiation exposure. Vicente's friend, the one who helped him carry the source, developed some severe radiation burns. By the end of 1984, 7 workers were deemed sterile, although it is unclear if this is a permanent thing or it was just temporary. 4,000 people had exposure to high levels of radiation. However, the long-term effects of this exposure is very difficult to quantify. Remember, more than 17,000 houses were built with the contaminated metal, but only about 800 were demolished. And wait, we are forgetting about someone. What happened to Vicente after all of this? Remarkably, Vicente did not seem to develop any long-term health issues. But, and this is a big one, 7 years after the incident, he was picked up by police and prosecuted for theft and for posing a threat to public health. While in prison, he was nicknamed El Cobalto for obvious reasons. He got out in 1993. Vicente was responsible to some extent, but no one else from the hospital, owners or administrators, were ever prosecuted. Nobody else went to jail for this. We need to talk about this document, the official government report. Something felt suspicious. The report paints a picture where every respondent was prompt and accurate. The effects on people's health were mostly temporary, and there was little information on those responsible for this disaster. A bit more digging felt necessary. Thanks to a fantastic piece of journalism by Laura Sanchez-Lai, I learned that the case was declassified recently, and the names of people that really suffer from this fallout became known. You can find a link in the description. First, the machine was illegally brought to Mexico, as suggested in an interview by the then Mexican Secretary of State. This would explain why it was never registered. Not only that, but a senior hospital administrator transported the machine from the US in his personal vehicle. A junkyard worker, Antonio Favela, became inexplicably ill shortly after handling the source and died 7 months after. After recovering the contaminated metal, sources claim that a portion of it was stored in open and populated areas, leading to its theft. The Mexican Institute of Health prepared reports with clear orders to discourage the lodgement of any workers' health concerns. This was to avoid setting a legal precedent that might be exploited by others. Vicente became public enemy number 1. According to some of his former neighbors, he got a divorce, was fired from his job, and after moving houses several times, people lost track of him. With time, people stopped fearing the buried material. The only reminders of this catastrophe are "do not enter" signs around the area. However, those old enough to have witnessed the case do not forget the feeling of being let down by their own leaders. The Juarez incident was a result of individual negligence and systemic failure. Unfortunately, events like these are not uncommon. For example, Spain in 1998, a cesium-137 source was melted at a scrap metal facility, releasing radiation that was measured all the way to Austria. Turkey, 1998, 2 cobalt-60 sources were sold as scrap metal, and one of them was never retrieved. Thailand, 2000, another radiation unit disassembled for scrap metal, 3 deaths and 7 injuries. India, 2010, essentially the same situation, 1 death and 7 injuries. China, 1992, A worker finds an orphaned Cobalt-60 source and takes it home. 3 deaths and 6 injuries. The Juarez incident was one of many that led to the establishment of a code of conduct to use and dispose of radioactive material. This is to ensure that no source becomes orphaned. Radiation detectors are now more commonly installed at international borders, scrap yards, and steel foundries. If you or anyone you know handles materials with the following signs, you should already know what you're doing, and you should be protected physically appropriately. If by any chance you don't recognize these signs, you should leave immediately. Radiation is invisible and it can very quickly damage your body. Thank you for watching all the way till the end, and if you enjoyed this video, share it with a friend. I'll see you in the next one.